So we'll start there. All right. And then let's go ahead and share this now too. So just let me know you can see it. Okay, good. So, I was sharing this week on the Slack channel. I went through the book of Acts. It was pretty dense with new vocabulary. And I think, I want to be candid, even as long as I've studied the Greek Bible, there's still vocabulary and terminology, particularly in the latter chapters of the book of Acts. Mm-hmm. There's all that nautical terminology and procedural terminology around Paul's trials and his travels. And it was challenging. So now I'm starting over again in chapter 1. So I think I'll get through Acts a couple times in this quarter, but I'm already finding it much easier going through. I think it just finished chapter 2 today. So it's been instructive and it's gets easier each time. But maybe for you, it's just a couple sentences, and that's okay. It really doesn't matter how much you get through. It matters how much you're getting challenged each time you do it and what you're learning. So, but it's been helpful to see, as we're talking even about the perfect today. Merkel in the chapter, or Plummer, whoever wrote that, said that the perfect is one of the less frequent tenses. So I don't know if you remember reading that, which is true, but there's still plenty of instances of the perfect, especially as you get to the latter chapters of Acts, and found actually throughout Acts. So it's not inconsequential. And I'll let the cat out of the bag too. This is the last tense you're going to learn today is actually not the perfect, but the pluperfects. Pluperfect is very rare. We're only going to cover it briefly today, but listen, after the session today, you'll go through all the tenses in Greek. So that's a big milestone. So we front loaded a lot of that, and you've made a lot of progress on that. So that's good. All right. So I'm just going to do a little bit of review. So you remember we looked at third declension nouns last week. And I want to clarify something because I was thinking about this today. I might have misstated something. I don't remember exactly how I said it. A third declension noun is any noun that ends in a consonant. Third declension noun is any noun that ends in a consonant. That includes liquids, but it's not limited to liquids. And I think I might have misstated that last time, so I want to make sure I brought that up. The third declension nouns are any noun whose stem ends in a consonant. That also includes the liquid consonants, okay? But it's not limited to those, and the significance of the liquids is that, remember, there's stem changes that we find oftentimes with third declension nouns, and that happens frequently, and particularly with the liquids. All right. So what we'll note is that there's some characteristic changes. We're not going to go through the paradigms again, except to say just a few things. Even though we're talking about supposedly a new noun declension, remember declension is just a grammatical pattern. You're going to see some things that are familiar. So for instance, here on this chart, if you look at the masculine and feminine, that first table, you look at the dative, which is the third row down, and you see that iota. And you will remember that that's characteristic, isn't it, of the dative forms for both the first, the second, and now for the third declensions. So I want you to start to see patterns, even though I know your recollection isn't going to be perfect without a lot of practice. And then notice as well that when we look at the plural genitive, you can see the omega noon in both the masculine and singular plural. So if you just look at your chart there, that's second row, second column, omega noon, right? And then if you just look across to the neuter table, you'll see also that the genitive plural also omega noon. right? So anytime you see omega noon, what are you thinking? Genitive plural. Genitive plural, right? And to summarize this, because I may have said this, but not quite as directly as I think is important to say it last time. When you learn these third declension nouns, it's important for you to learn the dictionary form, which is the nominative form, the lexical form. But it's also important to learn the genitive form as well, because oftentimes the genitive form, remember we said that there's stem changes that'll happen, and the genitive form often will include the entire stem, not the abbreviated stem. So if you look at just the nominative form, then you would think, okay, this is, for instance, let's say the word soma, if you'll remember, sigma, omega, mu, alpha, with the circumflex over the omega, right? So here we go.
What was the rule? Was it a liquid noun or liquid thing where if you have a circumflex, it's like a certain thing? Was that the liquid thing?
You're probably thinking of the future with the liquid.
Oh.
So, and we can come back to that in a moment, but let me just show you here. If I can avoid the hangman game. Seems to be happening over the top of the screen. So here's an example. Now, oh, by the way, I didn't mention this last time either. Maybe I did, but anytime you see a mu alpha, always that suggests neuter.
Neuter.
Mm-hmm. Anything with a mu alpha on the end,
In the
is
stem.
yes,
In the stem. Okay.
mhm, is a neuter. Okay.
Mhm.
And that I believe is also, yeah. Okay, but this would be, our nominative singular, right? Neuter, right? But then if you look at the genitive, it's going to look like this. Okay, so see the difference here in the stem? So that's the case ending.
Okay.
And you see here that if you looked at just the nominative singular, it's going to be soma, but
Soma,
here
yes.
it's somatos,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Now, the thing that I want you then to remember is that what helps you with third declension is the article, right?
Mm.
So the article will help you. So if you see two somatos, genitive. So that's why, like, when you learn it, and Merkel and Plummer make this point too, nominative, you ideally want to learn the nominative singular. You want to learn genitive singular,
Singular.
right? And you want to learn the article.
Article.
Yeah, which is to say the gender, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. There we go. Okay.
So the tau as a connective, is there a rule for that?
I don't know if it's 100% rule, but this is, at least this is very common. So for instance, here, this is another word you haven't learned yet, pragma,
Mm-mm.
which means like the thing, the topic, the matter.
Mm.
We get the English word pragmatics.
Mm-mm.
And by the way, here's where your English knowledge sometimes can help you, because the English derivation is almost always based on the genitive stem here.
Oh,
So this word pragmatics, you can see here, so it would actually be to pragmatos.
Pragmatos.
Mhm. And let's see if I can think of and some others. I can't think of any others on the top of my head, but that's enough to show the pattern, right? So here, for instance, like with soma, like if you've probably heard this word. which I believe-
Psychosomatic.
Mhm.
Mm.
Where's this coming from?
Psychology.
Wow,
So,
linguistically, somatos, right? See that? So that's where like sometimes your knowledge of English, yeah, transliterated words in English can be helpful. Okay. All right. So we actually have a lot. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I did want to get into that because I don't think I had said that quite, at least not that crisply the last time we came together. Go through the paradigms. Here's the feminine paradigm, the neuter paradigm. I only want to call out from this review slide that we looked at something we called the square of stops, and that's just because it's based on Mounts as a table, which ended up being sort of a 3x3 square, where he looked at labials, palatals or velars, and then dentals. And you can kind of figure out based on how they're articulated, where in the mouth they're articulated, how they're going to connect, right? So sarx, again, the C, right? Where's that pronounced in the mouth?
The back.
The back. So that's actually technically by itself is a velar. It's the soft, like if you touch the back of your tongue to the back of the top of your mouth, and there's that soft palate. That's the velum, okay? That's actually called a velar. Once you start getting to the hard palate, that's actually a palatal. Now, it turns out, and I'm just going to mention this and move on, you don't need to know this, but there's a phonological rule in Greek that was active actually since classical Greek times, but became progressive through the Koine period and later, where if there was a vowel that was pronounced in the front of the mouth, then the pronunciation would change if there was a vowel after it. Let me see if I can think of an example. Maybe there's one even in our chart right here. Let's see. Yeah, there is. So let's actually use this as an example. And I'm going to mention this. You don't need to memorize this, but I feel like the more that you know about how a language actually sounds, it can help you with memory, with recollection. Can you see this right here? So, I don't want to strain your neck too much, but so here we have sarx. And you remember what the gloss was for sarx?
Flesh.
That's right. All right. And then in the genitive, we have sarcos, right? And then in the dative, we should be sarki. Yeah, and that should be accent over the iota, definitely. Okay. When you have this kappa, so the kappa here, the kappa is an aspirant. And when it's pronounced with that puff of air that we talked about. And then if after that is a vowel that's at the back of the mouth, it's actually pronounced with the soft, remember that soft, like, in the back of your mouth. If the vowel that comes after it is pronounced, or is pronounced in the front of the mouth, like you try to make the sound like E. Okay, now make the sound in your mouth, ooh, or oh. That's in the back of your mouth, right? E is in the front of your mouth. Okay. If you have this sequence, then the pronunciation is with the hard palate. So it's not sarki, it's sarki.
Sarki.
Yeah, that's right. And it turns out that as the Greek language evolved through the Byzantine period, it came even farther forward. So it was like, like farther, to the hard palate in the mouth. So, that's just something I want to make you aware of. You don't need to fixate on that, as you're reading and stuff, you just know that there's more changes in terms of pronunciation than the ones that we've talked about, right? Like we've talked about things like the double gamma, how it makes a sound sort of like the English NG, right? Like angelus, right? So there's other phonological rules. But what I want you to see here is that when you have a xi and you add the sigma, which is the ending for this third declension noun in the nominative, then you get kappa plus the S, it becomes a xi, right? Okay. All right. Let's keep going. There's a few more of the only ones I'll call out here from these third declension nouns, a few more of the ones that end in a mu alpha. And we said that if it ends in a mu alpha, it's always a neuter. That's right. So haima, which means blood, which you'll see there at the first table at the top. And then you go down a few to chrema, which is I think 2, 3, 4, 5 down, which means the word or the saying. And then right below it's stoma.
So rhema, stoma.
Mm-hmm. So you can know by that ending that it is a neuter, and that means that in the genitive singular, it's going to be tu rematos, right? And it's going to be tu stomatus, okay? So you're going to see that paradigm.
How often does the word rhema refer to the word itself? Like John's version of the word became flesh.
In many cases, they're really synonymous. So I'm trying to think. I believe it's in 2 Peter where it talks about the word that came to the ancient civilizations from God. So yes, oftentimes they are synonymous, and it does refer to God's inscripturated word. There are instances of that.
So it can mean plain word speaking or refer to the word of God.
It can, yeah.
Or the second person.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So let's just jump in our last tense form, which is the perfect, and then also we're wrapping in with that the pluperfect. So the imperfect, you'll remember, was talking about progressive action in the past. It's something that started in the past and continued for a period of time in the past. We typically translate it as, I was doing something, right? The aorist, we said, is sort of a simple past event. That's explains about 85% of the usage of the aorist. Not 100%, but the vast majority of them. And you can translate it, for instance, if you're looking at the lexical Greek verb nikao is to conquer. Enikesa would be I conquered, and the aorist would be I conquered. And then the present, we said, is action that is underway. It can be sort of a durative, something that continues indefinitely or for a long period of time. It can be something habitual. It can be something that is happening, but not even necessarily without reference to whether it's a durative or will continue or come to an end. Now, the perfect, and this is where some of the nuance comes in, but the simple way of thinking about it is something that started in the past, but has a fixed result in the present, okay? And this is where I would nuance a little bit of what you would read, even though this is a first-year Greek, New Testament Greek textbook. if you've read Merkel and Plummer, they talk about something that took place in the past and then has a present result, right? And that's sort of the primary sense of it.
What did you think of in the video? Whoever's the guy doing the video, he came up with, this was the first definition, and he had two more definitions of the perfect usage, and then he referenced some theologian, some German Dutch guy. You know what I'm talking about?
This is from the Plummer video.
Yeah.
At one point, I did see all those, but I don't remember him referencing like a Dutch theologian.
When he made a illustration of the mountain thing.
Yeah. Did you see the mountain thing? Did you see the mountain?
The mountain thing.
What are your marker?
Here you go.
This is not teaching. This is remembering for him. So you got the. So, man, I'm not going to be good at this, but so you got the perfect, which is the normal definition here. And then as time went on, its usage started to change. And then at this point, it became more of a relevance to the fixed state, like in the here and now. And then as it continued,
the progression is, yeah. So
So
the
the
progression
mountain
is
time.
actually a little bit is even a little bit different from that. So in
the final
classic
one was-
times,
he said the final one was aorist. In other words, perfect became synonymous with aorist at one point. Obviously the video does a much better job than me.
okay. So in
So-
classical times, the perfect had really more of the durative sense in the past.
Yeah, he said this
It
was
did not-
55%, 40%, 10%.
It didn't have what they call the state of idea of like it's something which has achieved an end result.
He said
Okay.
that the emphasis changed as time
Right.
went on.
So in classical Greek, looking at it diachronically, in really like a lot of like the very early literature, the perfect really did not have as much of an emphasis on the perfective sense, that sense of something that has reached a conclusion or is no longer in a state of flux or change. When you get to the Koine period, this idea that it really starts to be introduced with the perfects. Merkel and Plummer talk about it as this resulting state of affairs from the past. Mastronardi is probably considered like the preeminent authority on the Greek language, really from like the classical period through like the Koine period. He's not a theologian; he's just a Greek grammarian and Euripides scholar, and he talks about it as a fixed result. Really emphasizes that. I think that that's probably a better reading. And in fact, even one of the examples we'll get to, which I think is even in this presentation, I'll explain to you why. As you go on, then yes, it started to, even by the late New Testament period, you can see that the perfect is really starting to have a sense much closer to like the aorist. And then eventually the perfect disappears.
Yeah,
Or sorry, excuse me.
Yeah,
Then the aorist disappears and the perfect supplants it.
really.
Yes. But even the perfect eventually, by the time you get to modern Greek, goes away. And there's the expressions you would use would be the verb echo, epsilon, he, omega. I have, which you remember says I have, but it was a sort of a helping verb, right? Great, where it would be, or an auxiliary verb. So it'd be echo plus like a verb sense, and that gives you that perfective sense. So yeah, there's a lot of
theologian that he referenced.
Yeah, but
Let me see if I
it's
can find it.
Alan Rutger, Ellen.
Yeah, but I wanted you to hear this because what you should like. There's a lot of literature on New Testament grammar from various theologians, or people who are coming from a theological background. And
Alan Gunther or something like that.
Gunther Porter has done a lot of scholarship. And the question is whether the volume of that scholarship is matched by the quality of the scholarship. So you can argue that, but I would say that Mastronardi comes closer. So he's not coming from a faith background, but he's
Hey man, I'm just letting you know what your own textbook says.
yeah, no, I know. But I think there's nothing wrong with what the textbook says, especially as a first pass. But I would just, rather than saying a resulting state of affairs, I think that the idea is that there's a fixation or this idea of telesis, right? That that you've achieved an objective, that you're no longer in the state of flux, right? That you've reached a sort of a durable, I would say like the word durable, right? You've reached a durable result. Okay. And I'll show you at least one example that seems to suggest that even in this set of slides here. Okay. But regardless, we're talking about action in the past with certainly a result in the present. That much is undisputed. The action, this is important, does not continue into the present, right? So and that's why it's oftentimes called stative, or in some of the grammars, combinative. You're talking about like this idea of something happening in the past, but by the time you get to the present, it's something that is already reached an end state. And this is probably good advice. Anytime you see a perfect now, just to translate it as I have, right? Something. So remember luo, I loose, I destroy. So leluka would be I have loosed. I have loosed. Okay. And here, yes, the perfect tense is not as common as some of the other tenses, but it's not really infrequent either. So you'll find lots of perfects in the New Testament. This is the example that I wanted to bring up to you, and I would read this a little bit different from Merkel and Plummer. Ego nenikeka, time to put my glasses back on. Nenikeka ton kosmon, typically translated, I have conquered the world. That's a perfectly serviceable translation. So there's some commentary here from Carson, and I think that his commentary is correct, right? That Christ has won this victory, and it's Christ who's going to triumph in the end. But the emphasis isn't necessarily what's going to happen in the end. The emphasis, I believe, that is expressed through the perfect is the fact that the result is durable. It's not in flux. It's something that's fixed, and that's what Mastronardi, like the point that he makes about the perfect. And I think you see that here, that Jesus could say, I have conquered the world, right? And so remember, like here, Jesus is speaking before the cross. He's obviously referencing what is going to happen at the cross. So some commentators will say, well, he's speaking proleptically, meaning speaking about something that happens in the future as though it's already a present reality, But I think that really what Jesus is doing is focusing on the durable aspect of that victory, right? And that's what's communicated by the perfect. That's what I would like you to see in this.
He's still talking about something that hasn't happened yet.
Right. So remember, aspect and time, right? Aspect and tense. So in Greek, we talk about tense hyphen aspect, right? Or tense dash form, right? Tense forms, because the idea is primarily aspectual. And even, and then breaking down that aspectual aspect even further, I look at examples like John 16:33, and they're highly suggestive and confirmatory, I think, of Mastronardi's hypothesis, or his thesis, that the perfect is really talking about something that is durable, a fixed result. So it's not even so much about when it happened; it's so much as is about how you look at what has happened. Is it something that is now settled and complete, right? And that's what Jesus is trying to emphasize about his victory: is that it's something that's final. It's a fixed result.
With
It's durable.
implications that bear to this day.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So again, like some of the commentators will find some, side channels for interpretation. Say he's looking at it proleptically, and that's why he's using a perfect here. But I think that's actually not really what's in view here. I think what's in view here, especially, is that sometimes with the perfect, there's an emphasis on what started in the past with a settled, like with a result in the present. Sometimes with the perfect, the emphasis is on the durability of the results, regardless of not so much when it happened, but the fact that it's something that's settled.
So in this case, isn't it also, well, this is more theological, but he's stating like a theological statement of sovereignty. Like, this has already happened, even though it hasn't happened yet. Like that's like.
Well, that's the other wrinkle. That's the other wrinkle from this example. Has Jesus conquered the world, right? So, does he have to be speaking about the cross, right? So this is actually more of an interpretive question. So, of course, what I just told you is predicated on the idea that conquering is associated with his death upon the cross. But if you made the theological point that for us, that Jesus has already conquered the world, right? Or God has already conquered the world. I think that the language of overcoming, the language of conquering, I think it's fair to attach that to the cross, right? That's what Jesus is talking about. If he simply said that, I rule over the world, or I have.
What I meant by sovereignty is like he's saying, like, I'm going to the cross and nothing's going to stop. Like, nothing's going to stop me from going to the cross and from completing the victory.
Yeah, I think that's justified in the context, right? Because here he is encouraging the disciples, and it's fully locked in that he's going to save them from their sins, and it's fully locked in. And I think that the perfect emphasizes this, that death upon the cross is going to have the result of eternal victory over sin. Right? Yeah, I think that's justified. Okay, so here's another example, one that's very familiar. Tetelestai. It is finished, typically translated, or has been finished. And again, here, Mounts talks about the fact that it's ongoing effects, it's completed. I think that's closer really to what the perfect communicates in Koine Greek, is this idea of finality, fixation, durability. And then 1 Corinthians 15:4, Agegertai, yep. He has been raised. So here's one of the passives. And that there's not very many of those. There's really only a handful. In fact, I think around 10 or so of the perfect and the passive. And here Gordon Fee in his commentary says it implies that he was both raised from the dead and he still lives. And I think that's a legitimate inference based on the nuance of the perfect. Yeah. Agegertai. Again. Agegertai.
Okay, so the eta is silent.
Not silence. Gay. Gertai. Epsilon? Is epsilon?
So a, gay,
A,
a,
gay, epsilon, and then the gamma, eta, so gay, gay, gertai. Say it about like 15 times and it'll eventually like
Well, there's
stick
two.
in.
All right, so there's two gammas. I only hear one though.
Gay, gertai.
A Garrettine?
Yes, although this is actually an exception. I'm going to get into the phonology of this, but this is actually an exception that does not have the reduplication. We're going to talk about this in a moment. So that second gamma is actually part of the root or the stem. It's actually not the duplication that you find. So let's move, before we get in, let's keep going here. Let's start with the simple examples first and then work into some of the exceptions. But you're actually pulling up a nuance here. There's a lot of exceptions with the perfect tense, just as we saw with aorist.
Well, I
Remember,
was just listening and I didn't hear the two gammas. I only heard one.
gay gertai, gay gertai, gay gertai.
A Garrettine.
No, gay gertai.
A gay Garrettine.
Yeah.
That sounds like
Yeah. All right. So this is if you add a strong accent over the upsilon, this is what would be your lexicon form for luo, right? So we're going to start with the verb stem. The stem is actually just the the lambda plus the upsilon, right? Now this is, so what do we look for with the perfect? Reduplication. That's what's unique here about the perfect. It doesn't come, you don't always find it. So we're going to get into that. But in the basics, most of the time you're going to see it with the perfect, the reduplication of the first letter, right? So, and then the addition of the epsilon. So you have lelu, and then you add a kappa, tense formative, and then you add the alpha connecting vowel, and that's it. So the alpha there is actually the connecting vowel, not the ending. You don't need to know that, but just for your information. So it's leluka. So we can say that together. Leluka. Leluka. So again, reduplication, 2 lambdas, tense formative, which is the kappa. And then in this case, it's just the connecting vowel. So the first person singular does not have an ending. All right, so let's walk through the perfect active indicative paradigm. So one thing to note is that these are basically the first aorist, except for, we'll see a little variation here in the third person plural. So remember here with the kappa, that's actually the tense formative for the perfect. So leluka. Then the second person singular, lelukas, all together, lelukas. Lelukas. Third person, leluken. There's a movable nu, so sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't. First person plural, lelukamen. Lelukamen. Second person plural, lelukate. And then the third person plural, lelukasi or lelukan. Lelukan.
I was gonna say these endings look familiar.
Yeah, because this is, again, it's the aorist, the first aorist. Except for the third, because there's 2 different types. And sometimes you'll see one and sometimes you'll see the other. So it can be either lelukasi or lelukan.
Oh, the kappa was the transformative letter.
That's the tense formative, yes. So when you see the kappa there, that's your signal that you're looking at a perfect.
Are most transformative letters consonants?
The tense formatives?
Yeah.
Yes. So there's sigma for the future, and for the aorist, there's kappa for the perfect. Yeah. All right. And then the middle passive, and again, so the total number of perfect active indicatives, I think, it's less than 100 in the, I want to say around 100, maybe actually a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. I think it's maybe 100, 110, something like that. The middle, that's the active indicative. The middle passive indicative is even fewer. So it's like around 10. But again, if you're going to have a perfect middle or passive indicative, start with the stem. Again, there you're going to see the reduplication. There's no kappa. And then there's a present.
Isn't that whole kappa thing kind of deceiving? It's like in one paradigm it works and the next it doesn't.
In the active, but not in the middle passive, right? So here for the perfect in either the middle or passive indicative, you have lelumai.
But to say that the kappa is the indicator that it's a future, or sorry, is a perfect, only works for certain words.
Only works for the active.
Yeah.
Not the middle or passive. That's correct.
So I mean, that's not exactly a helpful continuing rule.
Well, yeah, but it's not a rule, but it is a good guideline because again, the total number of like middle passive indicatives that you're looking at here, right here, I believe is around 10 or so, or less than that,
Okay.
Actually.
But the reduplication is an obvious dead giveaway.
Reduplication is a giveaway, but now I'm going to throw another wrinkle at you here in a moment because reduplication doesn't always happen either. So, okay, so let's take a look at that. All right. Oh, and let's actually first of all, let's walk through the whole paradigm for the perfect middle passive indicative. Again, limited instances that you're going to find it in the New Testament. But I want you to be prepared for it when you see it. So as we just saw, the paradigm would be the first person singular. So lelumai.
Lelumai.
Second person singular, lelusai.
Lelusai.
Third person, middle or passive indicative, lelutai.
Lelutai.
Mm-hmm. So perfect middle passive indicative, first person plural, lelumete.
Is this the same as the heirs still?
It's yes. So the differences would be these basically all of the endings except for like so the third person singular would instead of like that upsilon there, it's going to look different because there's a connecting vowel, right? So here, like, look at the third person singular. It says lelutai, right?
Yeah.
Lelutai. And if you had an aorist, of course, you're not going to have the reduplication, but you're also going to have the connecting vowel. And so then remember the connecting vowel is, and then your ending is an epsilon, right? But it's actually your connecting vowel. So when you have like say luo, you have the upsilon plus, I believe it's an eta. Okay. And then, you end up, I believe with eta iota. Meaning we may need to check this one. But here, because you don't have a connecting vowel, it's just lelutai. Like there's no, remember like we looked at, and we've gone through and looked at, and I said, don't try to memorize these, but try to notice patterns in the changes. When you have connecting vowels that combine with stems, then there are certain rules, right? So epsilon plus iota, right? Omicron plus upsilon, upsilon, right? And then you'll see that usually will then also see a change in the accent. It'll become a circumflex. Mm-hmm. Omicron plus omega will condense and become an omega. Yeah. So you see that, and then occasionally you'll see subscripting. So if you have something that ends with an eta, you add an iota, then it's an iota or eta iota subscript. Yeah, but you don't have that with the perfect. So it's just the stem plus that personal ending. No connecting vowel. Does it say that down there too? Yes, it does. This is the only verb formation that omits the connecting vowel. Yeah. All right. Reduplication. So there's some wrinkles here. We're going to start with vocalic reduplication, and this is about verbs that begin with the vowel. So let's say we have the verb agapao. You're not going to see reduplication. Instead, what you're going to see is lengthening. It is reduplication, but actually you're not reduplicating a consonant, you're lengthening that initial. So think of it as like an alpha plus an alpha, and then that becomes eta, right? So it's similar to the augment. Remember we looked at the imperfect and the aorist, and oftentimes we saw you add like an epsilon to an alpha, and then it lengthens to an eta, right?
So how would I know? So if I was just looking at this final word,
Mhm.
how would I know that this is perfect tense?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, you're going to remember that there's reduplication, and that reduplication involves both consonants and vowels, okay? So here what you're looking at, even though it looks like something like the aorist where you had an epsilon plus an alpha, and then it would lengthen to an eta. So it's not agapesa, it's agapeka, okay? So actually what's happening here is it's alpha plus alpha is eta, and then you're going to look over here and you're going to see this tense formative, right? The
Yeah,
tense formative.
Where'd the kappa come from?
Yeah, that's the sign of the perfect active indicative.
Transformative.
Tense formative, yeah. Oh, I kept hearing you say transformative, and I think I was mishearing you.
Yeah.
Tense formative. Yeah.
Transformative.
Yeah.
TENSE,
Right.
so it's 2 letters.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now notice also here that it does it say that here? Yeah, it causes the initial vowel to be lengthened, but also too, and I don't know if we mentioned this or if it's anyplace else in these notes, notice that the end of the stem is a vowel here, right? This is actually an alpha contract vowel. You'll never see the word agapao anywhere except in a lexicon. If you're looking at the first person present indicative, what you're going to see is agapo, right? Remember we just said alpha plus omega becomes omega with the circumflex. All right. But what happens over here when we have the kappa formative, right?
There's also an eta that wasn't there before.
That's what I'm trying to say, is that this alpha, which is at the end of this alpha contract verb, agapao. So alpha is the end of the stem or the verb root, right? Now it lengthens. Okay. So what's going on here? Again, alpha plus alpha. So that's reduplication leads to eta. Okay. Addition of the kappa tense formative tells us that we are dealing with which tense? Not imperfect, not aorist, but perfect. There you go. It also tells us that we're dealing with the present, and it tells us that it's indicative, right? So, and then we see the vowel lengthening, and that vowel lengthening is also an indication, could be an indication of the aorist, but here it's an indication of the perfect. So putting it together, you have the lexical form. Again, you won't see this anywhere except in the lexicon. It's not a real word in this form, right? And then we have the imperfect, which you remember was alpha plus the augment, which is epsilon, gives us, okay? So alpha plus epsilon is eta, okay? And we know that this is going to be an imperfect because we look at the personal ending right here, right? Is there a sigma tense formative telling us that it's the aorist? Is there a kappa tense formative telling us that it's the present, or sorry, perfect active indicative? Not present, perfect active indicative? No. Okay. Now, is it a contract verb with an alpha at the end of the stem? Yes, right? Agapao. So this is the personal ending. This is actually the stem right here, right?
Yeah.
Alpha, gamma, alpha, P, alpha, right?
Mhm.
So alpha plus the first person singular personal ending for the imperfect is Omicron new. Omicron new, right? So alpha plus Omicron gives us omega, right? And then there's the new. So this is the personal ending, but the personal ending blends with the end of the stem for that verb, that contract verb.
So it's kind of by deduction that I can figure out it's imperfect.
Yeah, oftentimes it is. You know, again, like a lot of times when I'm just scanning the text, I see a kappa right here, and immediately I think perfect. I see a sigma right here, right? And immediately I think
Errors.
aorist, right? I see, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, and then no sigma, no kappa, I think imperfect, right? I see, it looks like an augment, but I see no sigma, I see no kappa, I think imperfect, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
hmm
It's also combining the lessons all into one, remembering which key
Yeah.
letters are for what.
Right. So we're gonna do a little review as we go on here, because now you've learned quite a few of these, but you can see that in many instances, it's not that hard to distinguish between them, right? If this was actually something you're reading, forget this alpha and omega, right? It's agapo, right? Or agapes, you, second person singular, right? Or agape, epsilon iota, circumflex, he, she, it loves, right? So agapo, agapes, agape, agapuomen, right? Omicron, upsilon, circumflex, right? You know, so, and then you think, okay, well, what am I not seeing? No augment, right? What am I not seeing? Sigma tense formative, right? What am I not seeing? Kappa tense formative for the perfect. Okay. What am I thinking? Present tense. Present tense. This is a lexical form, but if I see agapo, I'm thinking present tense. Present tense, right? Because I know this is the lexical form. You do need to know the lexical form, right? But if I see agapao, I know agapao is the lexical form. I see agapo. I don't see a sigma for the aorist. I don't see a perfect, the kappa tense formative, right? I don't see an augment. I think present tense. Okay. All right. I think you get the picture. All right. So we're talking about vocalic reduplication, not just consonantal reduplication. Consonantal reduplication is the easiest because you'll just see it right away. You'll be like, you know, leluka. Okay. Luo. 2 lambdas there in the beginning. Got it. Now, when you have a diphthong, and what ends up happening is you're going to see that iota subscript. And that's actually like another tell for you. You will see this also with the aorist. But again, what's your clue here? The kappa tense formative, right? So this is telling us perfect. What's the kappa tense formative telling us, Tommy? Perfect, right? And then you look at this and be like, what is going on here? Hopefully you're
contract valve.
well, so Tommy, hopefully you're writing those vocabulary items and coming up with crazy stories about them every week, right? You do that 10, 15, 20 times. I tell, right? You write it, you say it out loud, you read it. I tell. So what is this? Oh, I know that there's a lexical form. I tell. But you know what? If you have an alpha and an iota, what's going to happen if you add an epsilon to it?
I mean, the eta, obviously.
Uh-huh. And then it's going to subscript the
Subscript
iota.
is related to the contract valve, right?
Well, this is not a contract. I mean, this is,
Right, contract verbs.
it is a contract verb, but but we're only looking at the beginning of the verb right now. So leave that aside for a second. We're only looking at the beginning, right? Let's say I get this far into the verb and I see an eta here, right? I see a tau, I see an eta, and I'm like, what is going on, right? Okay, so let's break it down. I see a kappa. The kappa tells me.
It's perfect. But
Perfect.
I got no idea what's going on with the rest.
Okay, all right. So let's look at the beginning of the word, right? I see an eta and a iota subscript. Okay. All right. So I'm thinking in my mind, what are the lexical forms I know that begin with diphthongs that can lengthen to eta iota subscript, right?
Don't stop playing with my heart.
Yeah. Well, right now it's hard for you, but after some practice, you're gonna look at this, and then here's the tell for me. Anytime I see that iota subscript there, I'm thinking, okay, this must have been some other diphthong, right? That was lengthened due to the addition of an augment, right? So what do I know so far? Oops. I've got a kappa here, which is a perfect formative, right? I have an iota subscript here, which is telling me I think I have a diphthong, right? Plus an augment, epsilon augment, which leads to this. Now, what's going on with the rest of this noun? I mean, seems very complicated, but actually you just break it down. And now I think ateka, okay, wait a minute. When I have perfect active indicatives, oftentimes if I have I have contract verbs. And if I have contract verbs, then what's going to happen to that last vowel? It's going to lengthen. And if it's an epsilon, it's going to lengthen to eta.
Is the subscript a prelude to that happening?
Well, I would say prelude, but it's a prelude in the sense that it's the first thing that you're reading, right? But it all works together. It's a system, right? So again, kappa, perfect, right? Eta iota, interesting. Oh, and by the way, look at this, strong accent and a smooth breathing mark. Okay.
Well, let me rephrase my question.
Mhm.
Is there ever going to be a subscript without the contract verbs?
Oh, yeah, good question. This came up actually in the first quarter. I believe the answer is no, but I'm not 100%. So I have not encountered I cannot recall any lexical form of a verb that includes an iota subscript in it. An iota subscript, to my knowledge, this is exhaustive, is an artifact, which means it only happens when you have a diphthong like this with two vowels, the second of which is an iota, right? And then you combine them with another vowel, in this case, an augment, which is an epsilon. So now you have an alpha iota diphthong plus epsilon augment gives us eta, lengthened vowel, iota subscript, right?
So the subscript doesn't always necessarily correlate to a contract verb?
No, that it doesn't have anything to do with that. What it has to do with is there a diphthong at the beginning of the verb?
Got it.
That's different. The contract is always about the vowel at the end of the verbal root, right? So this is the verbal root right here. This is actually part of the personal ending, right?
Yeah.
First person singular. So this is the beginning of it. The end of it is an epsilon. So this happens to be an epsilon contract verb, right? And then the epsilon here will lengthen to an eta. Okay. Now let's say you forget all those things. And not all of them, but let's just say you forget most of those things and all of the explanation I just gave to you about the augment plus the diphthong and the epsilon and lengthening. Now you just see this, you see the kappa, tense formative, maybe even from the context that you read, it's clear that somebody's making a request. And maybe that's what cues you off to think, oh, you know what, this is probably I ask, I request. Oftentimes when I'm reading, that's what happens, right? Like I may not remember offhand what is the lexical form, right? But if I saw this, I would see the iota subscript down here, which is making me think epsilon augment. I would see the kappa, which is making me think perfect active indicative, okay? And then I'm thinking, okay, ateka, yes, I have asked, right? And now if I'm reading that in context, then it might become clear because of what I'm reading around it too. All right.
I feel like Greek was like the pre-language for modern coding or something.
All languages have coding. You just already know the code for the language you speak.
Is it significant that it becomes like the last letter becomes an alpha?
You mean,
Yeah.
yeah, so it's significant in the sense that,
It happens that way.
well, this is the personal ending, and as we discussed, this is similar, except for the third person plural, to the aorist first person. So this should tell you when you see a tense formative, whether it's a kappa here or a sigma, and then you see the alpha, I'm immediately thinking first person singular, first person common singular, right? Okay. So some verbs that begin with the vowel reduplicate the first two letters. We already said that. Others then here, now this is where you see some irregular forms, right? So if you look at this form, akuo, right? It's you can see here like a kekua. It actually should be like, if you look at this, like there's no actual epsilon augment here and no change, right? So if I was looking at this and if this was a universal rule, right? See what happened here with iteo? We had an alpha syllable. This one happens to be a diphthong with an iota, right? Carries over to an eta with an iota subscripts. But akuo here actually does not. When you add the, the reduplication, not, oh, okay, important terminology, which I just confused, my apologies. I said augment. Technically, and again, if you forget this, it's not going to be the end of the world for you, but technically, this is not an augment. This is vocalic reduplication, okay? You may hear people say, like I just did, you may hear augments. Okay, but just for your information, actually what you have is reduplication, okay? Because this is alpha iota plus alpha gives us eta, right? And I'm sorry, I got that mixed. I was mixing context because up here, we were talking about the imperfect, and this is an augment, right? When we're talking about the aorist, you have agapao, you have alpha plus an epsilon, that is an augment, agapesa. Okay, when you get to the perfect, it looks the same, but to be technically correct, this is not an augment. This is technically a vocalic reduplication, because what's happening here is, let's take this instance right here. It's not alpha iota plus epsilon, it's alpha iota plus alpha. Okay, because that's reduplication, alpha plus alpha. All right. Then the wrinkle, and again, just remember what I'm going to tell you. Just try to become conversant with the forms, even if you forget all the little rules, right? But this is the wrinkle, okay? Verbs that have two consonants sometimes they don't fully reduplicate, they just add an epsilon. You're like, okay, well now this sounds really confusing because I just told you that there's no augmentation. And it's not really augmentation because like, look at this. So akuo, right? If it was reduplication, like you would find with an aorist, right? Or an imperfect, then this alpha plus an epsilon would give you an eta, right?
Mhm.
Okay. But notice here that this is alpha plus alpha, and then it does not change. It's just alpha. Okay. But what you do see is before the tense formative that syllable here actually does change, because actually what's happening here technically, okay, whether you were, now I know this is about as fine grained as you're going to get, right? But just so you know exactly what's happening, the omicron plus the u here, right, the upsilon, you're adding an alpha again. That's actually a reduplication, okay? That's actually a reduplication, and what it's doing is it's lengthening to an eta. Okay, so that's actually what's happening here. It's not, and then similarly here too. Now again, if all this just becomes too confusing, there's just a few simple forms like this that you'll memorize in the perfect, and you'll be okay. All right, but here with erchomai, so notice again that the vowel does not reduplicate. The initial vowel does not reduplicate, right? But strangely enough, the second vowel, in this case, it's an omicron. It does reduplicate. You add an alpha to it, and in this case, you end up with an eta. See that? So it's eleluta. So erchomai becomes eleluta. All right. Now, this one is also another exception because notice here at the end, what do you see? A theta. So not every single perfect has the kappa tense formative. So this is where I can only help you so much. And at one point, you just have to memorize the principal parts with the lexical form. So if you go to your lexicon, you're going to see erchomai, and then it's going to show you the perfect form, and it's going to be eleluta. Okay?
Oh, did rho and key become lambda?
Yeah. So this is it's a stem change. So remember, like with the aorist, we saw stem changes. That's what's happening here too.
Okay.
I'm already spending a lot of time with this, and I probably shouldn't, because remember, this happens, I think there's around 100 total instances in the whole New Testament. If I remember, it's somewhere around 110. It might be 111 total. And many of them are, see these two forms that you just saw right here, probably account for a very substantial percentage of all the ones you'll ever see. So akuo, akeikoa, I have heard. All right. Erchomai, eleluta, I come, I have come. All right. That's already, so already a very small number. And then you just memorize these two irregular forms. Out of that small number, now you're already accounting for a large number of those small number. Okay. All right. And then one final kind of pattern, irregular pattern that you'll see. So gnosko in the perfect, I think you're saved, because what do we see here?
Kappa.
Kappa, which is the tense formative for the perfect, right? So what are you thinking when you see this? Perfect, right? But notice here that there is no reduplication, right? So it's not like gegnoka, right? It's actually engnoka, and this is also a stem change right here too. So gnosk, is reduced down to gamma, nu, and I believe that the stem is actually Omicron here. Okay. And it lengthens to omega. So engnoka. So gnosko I know, engnoka, I have known, right? Engnoka, I have known. And really, like even these three are probably like, may even be the majority of all the perfects you're going to see. Okay. Yeah. Or if not the majority, it's going to be a large number of them for sure. Okay. So now aspirant reduplication. So again, like we were talking about aspirant letters. Remember, aspirants are just letters that you speak with a puff, right? So if you say the word, there's air that comes out, right? You know, if you say the sound th or fa, right? And actually, was voiceless, but it's actually also an aspirant. There's air, puff of air that comes out.
Big man, I gotta use the bathroom.
Okay, we'll actually take just a few minute break and we'll come back. Let's do that. All right.
Rho doesn't have an aspirant letter?
An aspirant?
Aspirant? Rho does have like an H.
It is aspirated. You can have rows aspirated, but it is not it's not always considered to be a full consonant.
Okay, it's more liquid.
Yes. So it's like but for the purpose of what we're looking at right here, I'm trying to think if there's any.
Well, maybe because a rho doesn't have a non-aspirant counterpart.
It would not have a non-aspirated counterpart because it's actually pronounced like there is no like true glottal stop. That's right. So glottal stop would be the non-aspirated, like like when you say the word you know, and Arabic has a glottal stop like that. For instance, like alif at the beginning of that word. We use it in English. We don't realize it. A lot of the words that we say that begin with a begin with a stop, actually. It's not it doesn't start with a vowel. If you actually if you actually pay close attention to how you vocalize that. And that's right, there is no glottal stop in Greek. Yeah. Just the aspirated. And actually, the other thing, but for this rule, that doesn't apply to this the way you're thinking, because the rho is actually a voiced. It's called a fricative, meaning like, you know, like you're constraining the airway in order to make a sound, and then the he here would be the voiceless. So what we're looking at right here with these aspirant letters are actually voiceless aspirant letters. And those voiceless aspirant letters in Greek then will reduce to their non-aspirated equivalents. We're getting really technical with this stuff, but they will reduce to their non-aspirated equivalents when you have reduplication with forms, with the perfect form. Yeah.
All right, gotcha.
Mm.
I need to go to the bathroom too. No. Oh, okay, let's see. I can try that. That is so far out. Yeah, I'm usually I tend to go technical on the how and the whys. Even in college, that's how I retain information because I
Yeah.
hate memorizations.
Exactly.
So, like, if I kind of learned the rules as to why it became that way, that's how I retain it more. But it's it's a lengthier way of
Is it?
learning.
Yeah. But I'm with you. I prefer it that way. My Greek instructor did not go into the
Yeah.
phonological rules for noun case formation or for conjugation for the verbs. I wish he had. I think it would have made it more intuitive. And the farther you go along, the more I think it actually helps you because you kind of see it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yes, perfect. Not the most frequent, but fairly common. And then the pluperfect actually is it's the pluperfect that occurs. I think it's 100, maybe 110 times in the New Testament, and in the passive of the pluperfect, I think it happens maybe like 8 times or something like that. 100. We're talking around 100 or so total occurrences, give or take. All right. So aspirant reduplication, and it's better just to go right into the examples now. So terapeuo or peuo, let's start with the lexical form. Terapeuo, which is I heal. I think you've had that as a vocabulary item, right?
Therapy.
And then in the perfect passive or perfect middle, you would have terapeumai, teterapeumai. And technically, that first tau is pronounced without a puff of air, right? So it's teterapeumai, teterapeumai. So when you think about think of the words top and pot. So Tommy, listen really carefully to the T sound in both of these words, just the T sound. Top and pot. Are they the same sound?
No.
They're not. They're spelled the same way. Okay. Now think of the P sound in both of those words. So pot and top. Top. The P sounds are different, right? The first one is non-aspirated. The second one is aspirated. All right.
Is this perfect by reduplication?
Yes.
Okay.
So you can see the reduplication here, but notice that the reduplication includes the tau instead of the theta. So this is the aspirant, which then is reduced to the non-aspirant in the reduplicated form here. So it's teterapeumai. Teterapeumai.
Theta is
Teterapeumai.
pronounced te.
Te. Not te.
So
top
theta.
T versus t. Yeah.
So it's the like, for example, his name. In the Philippines, it would be pronounced Thomas, but here in America, it's pronounced Thomas. It's kind of like the H is a silent.
You're using a forbidden name.
It's legal.
Yes, now, but those are actually two different sounds, right?
Yeah.
So th is a dental.
Uh-huh.
Think about it. Make the sound with your teeth. T is the alveolar, if you must know. So that's that part of your mouth is toward next to your teeth. Make that sound, right? So those are actually two different sounds. So that's not what's going on here with an aspirant. So the aspirant difference here, although traditionally it's pronounced theta, it would actually have been theta,
Yeah.
theta with the
Yeah.
pronounced that's also hard for people who are English speakers because we don't aspirate. It's a phonological rule in English. We don't aspirate consonants at the beginning of syllables. So it's Tommy, not Tommy, unless maybe somebody had too much to drink or they're trying to make funny or something, right? We don't do that. But in Greek, you do. So it's terapeuo, not terapeuo. It's terapeuo, okay? And then it's teterapeumai. So don't worry about that. Like I think I would say just keep working on that but think about that as you get into the reading, right?
This word is way too long.
Yeah. But again, this is what helps you, right? So just know therapeuo. That's already a little long, but think of therapy. That's going to help you. And then now you just have the reduplication, and now you just have the personal ending for the middle or passive perfect, right? Perfect, middle, passive, indicative.
Oh, my question is it pronounced therapeuomai?
That's what I'm saying is it's not really.
It's theta.
Traditionally, it's theta. That's an accommodation to languages like English that actually do not have an aspirated voiceless alveolar stop,
Okay.
which is yeah, aspirated. In English we don't have that in syllable first position. We don't do that. We have it at syllable final position. So pot, but not top, right? You don't. People sometimes have lisps actually pronounce things that way, right? Yeah. So, all right. Another example, panero'o, and it's a lexical form. You'll never see that. But if you remember, it means I reveal or I show. And that is reduplicated to paneromai. Paneromai. Yep. All right. And then what's going on over here again? So you may think, looking at this, that the personal ending was Omicron, Mu, Alpha, Iota, and then the Omicron plus the Omicron gave you that Omega, but that's actually not what happened. It's actually the lengthening of the final O contract, which is just part of the perfect form. So this is the personal ending is actually Mu, Alpha, Iota. But if you don't know that, that's okay. Just need to be able to see this form and paneromai and say, okay, panero'o is the lexical form, right? So this is why you do need to know your vocabulary, because then you can start from that, say, okay, here's the reduplication. Yeah, it's a non-aspirant counterpart. Here is the middle passive first person personal ending, right? So I reveal, I have become revealed, or I have been revealed.
I'm just now getting my letters and pronunciation. You want me to master the words?
Oh, you got to keep pushing.
So
That's is what it is with every language. And again, like I said, I've been reading in Acts every day, and it's so critical. Like what you do is, it's definitely not where you're at right now. It's where you are months and years from now as you read.
So fee is pronounced p instead of like an F.
That's right.
So technically phone should be hone.
That's right.
Uh,
Hone.
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 So Sophia is Sophia.
Sophia.
Oh,
With an S, with aspiration, with the buffer there. Which again is not, we don't have that sound in English. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, and so if students forget all that and then they just listen to other people pronounce kind of this more traditional Erasmian pronunciation, that's fine. I do think you learn something by hearing the sounds of language. You see the sound correspondence and contrast. It helps you even interpretively in some cases because there's this repetition of sounds. Sometimes there's a stoccata, sort of like where there's like choppy sounds. You can see that. Occasionally, I'll find that in Paul's epistles. And knowing the actual sounds and how they're pronounced, I think helps you to
So ChatGPT
identify that.
Pronounce Greek.
Mm.
Does it do so in
Mhm.
Erasmian or
I think it's trained well enough that if you say like an Attic pronunciation. Now again, like the difficulty is that there's not agreement on what that pronunciation was during the Koine period. It's clear that during the Koine period that there was a period of flux, and many of the consonants and the vowels were changing their value. It's also clear that over time, the pitch accent musical quality of Greek was being reduced to an emphasis accent, where you're emphasizing a syllable, but not necessarily rising, lowering, or rising and then lowering the pitch of that syllable.
Mm.
So they became stress accents instead of pitch accents. That change was certainly well underway by the turn of the first century. But I think there's very strong internal evidence that the Bible, or at least portions of the New Testament, were intended to be pronounced with Attic pronunciation. And some of the evidence for that, which I shared with you, was that there are plays on words in the book of Hebrews that don't make sense unless there is Attic timing. Without it, the structure of it breaks down. So that's just one indirect evidence that it was intended, at least in part, to be.
Can you imagine the
That's the
ancient
way.
Hebrews imagining that the New Testament canon be written in a Gentile language?
Yeah.
It's not as far-fetched though as you might think, and there was tremendous national pride that Jewish people had, as many nations do. That pride, I don't think you can say that it had nothing to do with their language, but it wasn't the fundamental defining reality of their national identity. The Jews who traveled to Egypt were probably diglossic. They probably spoke Hebrew, which is an ancient Northwest Semitic language, and they probably also spoke Egyptian. We have epigraphic evidence for that. So we'll find in the Sinai Peninsula epigraphs that have Canaanite, essentially Hebrew on one side, and then Egyptian glyphs on the other, hieroglyphs. Then when they traveled to the Promised Land, the Hebrew, if you take an early dating, which I do, and believe that the Hebrews that they landed in Canaan somewhere in the mid 15th century BC. Nobody doubts that by the middle of the 6th century BC that Aramaic had supplanted Hebrew. And we know that for a lot of reasons. Number one, the Hebrew Bible itself is actually written with an Aramaic script. Even the Hebrew portions are written with the Aramaic like block letters. There were, or the sometimes called the imperial script, Aramaic scripts. We know that during the time of Christ that the spoken language, and we see evidence of this even with some of the words that are transliterated from Aramaic into Greek, we know that Aramaic was the mother tongue for at least the vast majority, if not all of the Jews in the 1st century BC and around the turn of the century, and it continued to be. So if you were to ask what's the Jewish language, you have to ask another question. When? We assume that it's Hebrew. Hebrew itself, though, was a language of the synagogue. It was the language of the Torah. It was certainly well known, but it was not the language of the streets.
That was a surprise. Hebrew died off so fast. It didn't come back.
For 70 years, the Jewish people were in Babylon, and you have to remember, like during that time, that there was rapid secularization of many of the Jewish people. Remember, most of the Jewish people did not come back from the captivity in Babylon. It was a remnant that came back to the land. In fact, Jewish people remained in Persia for thousands of years, really until relatively recent times. And there's even a remnant of Persian people or Jewish people in Iran today. So those who did come back, they'd been influenced by the culture in a way that was different from, for instance, the Egyptian sojourn, where the Hebrews were separate. And even the Bible talks about how the Hebrews were abominable to the Egyptians, and they did not want to cohabitate with them, or that's not right the word. They didn't want to live in the same communities with them, right? In Babylon, it was different. So you had Jews who were, in order to be able to survive, and be able to speak the language of the marketplace, you had to know Aramaic. And if you wanted to get ahead, really, you were forced to learn Aramaic, and that was the language of commerce, diplomacy, government, education, right? Yeah, and then that changed again with in the beginning of the 4th century BC, and then really like in the 3rd century BC with the Hellenization of Palestine. So with Alexander the Great, really at the end of the 4th century BC with his conquests,
Classical Greek became
Attic Greek, the Greek of Athens, and that happened to be the dialect that was spoken by Alexander, right? So but at that point, then the lingua franca, the language that linked the empire together was Greek. So many Jewish people learned Greek as well.
not as relevant, but how did English become so prominent across the globe?
Well, that really goes beyond this, and I can't speak to that the same way I can about some of these things. But English, it's an interesting story how it actually became a world language, because if you were to put your money in the early modern period on what would be the world language, you could have put on a few other languages and you would have thought you'd have had a better bet. French, French and Spanish, particularly Spanish. But
it helps with understanding historical cycles.
It does help understand how languages operate, because when you look at much of the world today is diglossic or triglossic, with English being one of those languages, right? One of the registers of the language that they speak. So, for instance, in Lebanon, people speak Arabic, they speak French, and then most everybody speaks English too. Sometimes they'll even speak all three in the same sentence. I've actually heard them
So Koine Greek, became very popular because of the empire, the Greco-Roman times.
Yeah, it's what, was the language of trade. It was the language that,
But how did
administrative
English
language.
do that?
I'm not, it's something I looked at before, but I just haven't, it's something I haven't thought about for a long time. There was one, what was it? There was one key event. But I don't remember now. Yeah, it's outside of my ken.
How,
That's why we're in a Greek class.
what time frame were you thinking of?
So it's actually a pretty recent phenomenon that English has become a world language like this. I mean, up until like the
Because
beginning
our
of the
economy?
I think it's more trade, economy, but really just kind of more trade. So, and I'm kind of hazy on this, so please don't hold me to this, but you need to know that French was the world, like the lingua franca up until the early 20th century. In fact, even today, like, the European Parliament, the primary language is French. English is often spoken to. United Nations, to this day, like French is frequently spoken. French is a lingua franca through much of Africa still today. But the decline of like a lot of the world powers, had a lot to do with that. So, you had competing blocks like of Spanish speaking, French speaking, German speaking in Africa for a while. And it was the lack of sort of, England did get its empire going, but it took a while, right? And as these other empires retreated, I know that had a lot to do with it too. Plus the British were instrumental in sort of holding together the peace in various places, particularly in the Middle East, also in Africa, as some of these declining powers left. So for instance, in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, what was then Kurdistan, there was the British Protectorate. And so this was British civil administration. It was a bridge between the old European empires and then sort of this new like autonomous order of countries. And something similar to that happened in Asia too. As the Spanish left and the Portuguese left and the Germans left, and yeah.
Or Philippines, and I think South Korea, it's America that brought English.
Brought English, yeah. But the U.S. didn't really come to South Korea as like as an imperial power.
It's more of like
a protectorate.
Yeah.
It's probably,
Philippines.
yeah. I mean, like U.S. had more imperial ambition in the Philippines, but it was always like, but it was never firmly committed. And it wasn't the same way as it was with the Spanish, like who were, like the Philippines were more, I think, more of a protectorate. And it's just not like the U.S. doesn't have the same kind of imperialist DNA that other countries have. We do have some, but not the same way. Whereas like some countries, it's just in their DNA. It's the way that they're built.
Like the Russians?
Like the Russians, like there's no, like,
They've been like that for like millennia.
look at like, it doesn't matter like from the time of like tribal chieftains in the Middle Ages to the time of the czars to the time of communists to the time of corrupt plutocrats like Putin. It's just part of like, it's just so ingrained into what it means to be Russian. It's an expansionist identity.
We Vikings, we go.
That's right. That's what it is. It's the legacy of like a lot of people when they think of the Vikings, they think of like, Denmark and Sweden and Norway, and there were like conquerors and raiders, but the most enduring legacy, like most of those people, they ended up in France and in places like Normandy, and then they just stayed and became part of the local population. It's the ones that actually went to Central Europe and then, created like the duchy, of like Moscow, and then like it's that legacy of the Vikings that has shaped the world a lot more today, because that's what Russia is. It's this mixture of like Scandinavian and Slavic peoples.
Mm.
You can see it too, like when you look at like Russian people, you can see like the Slavic and the Scandinavian like features. I can tell.
Mm.
It's true. Like what they, there's all sorts of genetic and historical evidence for that, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. But I know that but to your question, like, yes, like there was a need for civil administration, particularly in the Middle East,
Mhm.
but also in Asia too. A lot of the powers that left there, and then it became more important for a lot of those countries to become aligned with one polar axis over against another, because at the beginning of the 20th century, like, the Russians were expanding, of course, the Japanese were, expanding. So it became very important, like for a lot of the Southeastern Asian countries to have diplomatic relations, with neutral or potentially allied nations. So I don't know. There's probably somebody who can spend a lot more study on that. But I know that's just me remembering back to a conversation from a long time ago, like reading on that. Yeah, really good question. It is important, coming back to the scriptural implications, because by the time you do get to the New Testament, most Jewish people, or many Jewish people, are truly triglossic, with Hebrew being the language, the religious language, the language of the synagogue, and possibly the language of the civil administration of Judea, Aramaic being the street language of the people, and Greek being the administrative language of the region and the trade language of the region. So you see those influences shaping like the New Testament text in different ways.
I'm kind of also thinking it's God's providence that He allowed the New Testament to be written mainly in Greek, because of the specificity of Greek allows a more accurate translation of the doctrines of New Testament compared to Old Testament, where the Hebrew prose is more suitable, whereas Greek, like just learning the tenses. Imagine if the New Testament was primarily written in English, it would probably be a nightmare to translate that accurately.
Well, I think, most linguists today would say that every language is capable of the same degree of precision and expression in the surface grammar. So there's a deep grammar that this is, the prevailing linguistic theory is there's a deep grammar that is intrinsic, it's native to every human being. It's this fundamental faculty that all of us have and we're born with. And then we're able to generate grammar in the language that we learn. So it's oftentimes called generative grammar. I don't know that, Greek, every language is capable of that level of expression if you have the facility with it, right? The experience with it. So I don't know if that's actually, I don't think it's quite fair to say that Greek actually is better that way than other languages. It's more capable or more precise. It was the language of the ancient world, and yes, by the time the church was started, there was a language that was spoken across the entire Mediterranean world. It's clear that it allowed Christianity to be able to spread much more rapidly than, for instance, if it had happened in the 4th century BC, where there was a lot of local dialects. Even Greek itself was not highly standardized on the Attic dialect. There was a lot of dialectal differences, and some of them were extreme from one another.
Like New Orleans to Boston.
Sure. That's a fair enough example. It is. And then even the Roman administration, they spoke Latin, but the ones who were administering in the eastern part of the Roman Empire had to have facility with Greek, because that was the language that people spoke. Romans didn't have this sort of pride around the Latin language either. In the western part of the empire, from the Italian peninsula to Spain, Latin was the language.
There seems to be a more modern emphasis on like pride of your language today.
I don't know. I'd say that's not something from the examples that I know, yes, that seems to be true, but I don't know about what did everybody really think back then about their language?
I could be wrong, but like the unilateral unis, so I'm learning this term, are usually pretty, or I even heard it from another pastor recently, like Americans are pretty arrogant when it comes to English. Like we look down upon other languages usually.
Yeah. I think it's a complicated question because people in the US too, they don't, except in certain places, don't live in multilingual environments. Like if you grew up in Southern California, almost everybody's heard some Spanish living in Southern California, and not too many people actually speak Spanish fluently, but a lot of people speak a little bit, and you're familiar with that. Just is what it's almost like what it means to be like a Los Angelino, is to speak English and Spanish a little bit. I think that's just, that's probably true. Whereas like in Europe, Europe is roughly the same size as the continental US, but there's dozens of languages that are spoken in the same area, right?
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the last thing I'll just say about that, and then move on, but where it does become relevant for biblical interpretation, when Paul says to the Romans that he is seeking their help in extending his mission to Spain, people oftentimes don't realize this, but even from and I don't mean this like in the sense of like even in the sense, I will say like even in a dispensational sense, it has strong significance. Because what's happening is now you're seeing the advent of cross-cultural mission for the first time. And that's actually really, I think, the last frontier of development, right? In the transition from the old economy, the Jewish economy, then to the church, right? So there's the production of the canon, which is the authoritative books of the apostles, which talk about Jew and Gentile in one body. There's the pronouncement of the church in Acts 15 that Jew and Gentile should be together. There's the rejection of the Jewish mission, or the conclusion of the Jewish mission by Paul in Acts chapter 28, when the Jewish people reject his message in Rome, right? And then he says, I'm going to go to the Gentiles. And then the very last leg of that is not just going to people who are of a different ethnicity, but a totally different language altogether. That's the final rung, right? Or the final ring on the expansion of the people of God as Jew and Gentile, right? It doesn't, because
How is he going to go to Spain if he did? Did he know Spanish?
So that's a good question. If he was, just because he was born a Roman in Cilicia, doesn't mean that he knew Latin. And in all likelihood, he did not grow up speaking Latin. He was very well learned, so he would have focused on Hebrew, Aramaic, the languages of Scripture, because those are both languages of Scripture, right? And by the way, that might be one of the reasons why you don't see as much ethnic pride, because there's actually even a part of Scripture, right, that was written in Aramaic, not just Hebrew. And he would have known Greek really well because he would have been born as a Roman citizen, and the language of Rome in Greece at that time in Cilicia was Greek. That was the language of administration, of education. It's only in the Western Empire that spoken Latin, was predominant. There's a very good chance and this is part of the reason I think why it took Paul so long to begin that mission. Part of it is because he was interrupted, right? So in the late 50s, if he's writing to the Romans and asking for their help to get to Spain, there's something about the tone though about it that's different. He doesn't write letters to other churches and say, hey, guess what? I'm going to go here and I need your help, right? He just kind of goes. He says, hey, this is my mission right now. But there's something special about Spain. I think you kind of get that. You get that sense as you're reading Romans. Like this is a new chapter. And I think part of that was cross-cultural and also cross-linguistic.
And Rome was the capital of the world at the time, so that
Rome
was
is the capital of the world, but he didn't live in Rome, right? Grew up in Cilicia, which was
Rome
Greek
was
speaking.
an ideal spot to learn the language.
Exactly.
Because everyone internationally
So for those 2 years when he was in imprisonment, I think that was one of his key objectives, was to prepare for the Western Imperial mission. Yeah, which was to go to Spain. Yeah, so this is so it does have some significance, like when you think about the fact that the New Testament is written in Greek. And I do think, I've met people who are fluent in several languages, but was Paul fluent in Hebrew, in Aramaic, in Greek, right? And then also in Latin? Maybe. But I think in all likelihood, it was a learned language for him. It was going to be different this time. Yeah. So it does have an impact even interpretively. Like when you think about like what's happening with the expansion of the church, the maturity of the body, in the New Testament era. That ministry was interrupted by his imprisonment, but it was probably also facilitated by it, and we don't know this with complete certainty, but we do have records from the early church fathers that he did complete that mission in the early 60s to Spain.
Well, if you want to learn the language, find the Spaniards in Rome.
So when you think of the Indo-European languages, that was spoken Latin.
They spoke Latin back then.
They spoke Latin. It was a colloquial Latin. So the Romance language, what became the Romance languages, but even at the time of the first century, spoken Latin was already different from written Latin. It was starting to decline more simply and looked a lot more like modern Romance languages, like Spanish or French. It had regional differences. Yeah. So, yeah, very, very fascinating. That's something I give a lot of thought to, looking at Paul's, missionary method, and the fact that he said, for instance, that from Illyricum to Jerusalem, I fully preached the gospel. What he was thinking about was the final frontier, which was cross-linguistic ministry, right? See, that's why he said that, because that was that kind of the final ring on the tree of expansion of Gentile ministry, to the ends of the earth in his mind. Yeah. Okay. All right. So aspirant reduplication after a long parenthesis. So again, just, look at those first consonants and look at the non-aspirant counterparts. So key, E, and yeah, okay, how do you my, it's like it's hard for us as English speakers to reproduce that or for it to sound, because it's just not natural for us. We don't have that difference. Every sound that we make, like with the soft palate, first of all, we don't truly make a sound in English with the soft palate all the way back, like Buch, like in modern German, be like Buch back there. We make it with the hard palate, but it's a sound. And again, in syllable initial position in English, it's very hard for us to make that sound. Anyways, like a he, because it's just not, it's not natural to English. Yeah. We have it in the final position, right? So the word, like in English word, book. Think about it, right? It is book. It's not book, but not in the initial position. It's key, not key. All right. And then we should also mention verbs that have prepositional prefixes, right? So apoluo, for instance, that was the paradigm. Compounded prepositional prefixed verb. Reduplication is going to happen after the prefix. So we have apalelusai, apalelusai, not le apalusai, right? All right. And katabebeka, from katabino, to go down. And then it's a katabebeka. Apaluo, if you remember, means to release, as other senses like divorce or to send away. We've already been talking about this, so this is a little anticlimactic, but we've already been talking about some of the irregular second perfect forms, and you saw them earlier. So I'm not going to spend too much time on them right now. But here's a few, and I think we saw the last one, erchomai, ginomai, becomes gegona. And you would think that is reduplication. It's actually not, because the stem here is actually epsilon, gamma, noon, I believe. And then there's an infix of the O, the omicron, O sound, which is because of the perfect. So no kappa transformative. But you can either remember all that, or you can just look at this gegona and remember that's the perfect form. But actually what's happening here is there's no reduplication. It's actually, the gamma is, this gamma here is actually part of that change, that altered stem, right? It's gamma, epsilon, gamma, and I believe it's noon too, this part of it. But it's definitely gegona. And then grapho, it becomes gegrapa. And then here you do see the reduplication, but you'll notice again here that you have that aspirated sound with the teeth, so dental. It's actually a dental fricative. It would be E, or like an aspirant, the stop in I think, which is the classical sound P, right? So gegrapa. And then because it's pronounced in the beginning of the mouth, if you think about like where's the kappa sound, it's in the back of the mouth, right? So that kappa augment drops out just because of a phonological rule. So you can't have two consonants like that are pronounced, one in the front and one at the back of the mouth. So gegrapa. Again, just recognize the form. You don't need to memorize it, but just recognize it. And then erchomai, aleluta. Aleluta. All right. Lambano, elepa. So lambano, I take or I capture. Elepa, I have taken, I have captured. Elepa. Peto, and then pepoeta. So I trust or I have confidence in, I obey, I have trusted. Pepoeta. And this one, it's the same phonological reason. Where's the T sound made? With the that's the alveolar like ridge on your mouth, beginning like right above the teeth. So the kappa sound then is made at the back, and that's linguists would say infelicitous. So right, you would start to become a click language where you don't have vowels between letters. But in order for us to have just the perfect form, you cannot have that theta and then also kappa. Okay. And then with lambano, what's happening here is just a stem change. Yeah, so it's totally, as you can see, it's totally different. Although not quite as different as you might think, because if you'll notice here, what's the, if we believe that this is actually pronounced as P, which I think it was, where's that pronounced? With your lips, right? Now make a B sound for a beta. Where's that pronounced? With your lips, right? What's the difference between P and beta? It's voiced, unvoiced. B, beta, voiced. P, right? Unvoiced. All right. And then the lengthening again of the alpha here to an eta. So just recognize them. You don't need to parse out all the sound changes that way. All right. I'm actually going to make a decision here now too, because I just think this is a lot to be able to absorb. I'm just going to call these out. I'm not going to go through them, but on a bino, which we actually did look at this in the last slide. Then in the perfect is on a bedbeka. So you can see the reduplication there happening. Remember, it's a prefixed verb, or so you do see the reduplication happening, but then also a stem change because bino now you can see that the noon drops out there, right? All right, I said I wasn't going to explain it, so let me hold to that. So Eurisco, then Eureka, right? So like the town Eureka. And this was the
They both have the kappa.
they do, yeah. And so that's what causes the problem, when you add like an additional, the perfect form. So it turns out that the sigma then just drops out though, because it's a different stem. So, okay. And then Lego Eureka. So this is an important one to know. I say Eureka really has more of the sense I have said, but it almost becomes, remember we were saying that sometimes the perfect starts to almost be like an aorist, and you can see that with this particular stem, Eureka. So a few times you'll see it, and it's almost like I said, not I have said. Okay. All right. And then, again, there's issues where you have verbs that are ending with, dentals, with these alveolar, kind of like frontal palate sounds, and they will drop out before the tense formative. Okay. So sometimes that happens, but then also we saw some irregular ones too, right? Remember? So eleluto, let's go back. Did I pass it? It's here somewhere. Yeah, so erchomai, right? Eleluta, not eleluca, right? So there's some irregular forms. That's just why. So some of this you just do need to memorize the principal parts, right? One of the principal parts is the perfect form because some of them are irregular. All right.
Can we pick this up next week?
I'm actually going to just bring it to a close because the clue perfect form, what I'm just going to ask you to do, I'm not even going to go through because again, it's actually 86 times and it's less than 100 times you find it. Only thing I'm going to point out with it is that you find this characteristic epsilon iota. Read the chapter, listen to Merkel and Plummer, and this doesn't come out in the book. Maybe it does in this lecture, but this is what you're looking for right here. Epsilon iota, and that's how you know that it's different from the perfect. Okay, so rather than I have released, I had released, right? So something that happens in the past and realizes the emphasis is on the realization of that state in the past. Okay. You're done. You're done with every Greek tense. this is actually a huge huge milestone. Huge milestone. There's some differences in the mood. There's some differences that but those are pretty straightforward. You learn the most important grammatical elements in the congregation of the Greek verb, which means now that your ability to start reading will accelerate very rapidly. So you need to do it. Okay. I'm not going to go through the review. Take a look at that on your own this week. But we've actually been already reviewing quite a bit, I think, from week to week. So this just kind of picks up some of the differences between the different tenses. And then there's vocabulary items. I'm going to let you go through those on your own as well. All right. See if there's anything else I wanted to say. Nope, that's it. Everything else we can pick up next week. Any questions, Ed? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just gotta,
This is one of the hardest chapters too, because there's
I just gotta
so
review
much.
it back at home.
there's so much in here that it wouldn't even make sense to. You see, the other thing you gotta remember is that we're only meeting once a week.
Does that mean?
This was kind of put together with the intention that you're going to go through this, like, at least 2 to 3 times a week together.
So lesson 16 is next week,
Yeah.
and that's the end of the semester.
Yeah.
So when are they gonna put the registration for the next semester?
I was just thinking about that today. So I got to connect with Scott on that. It feels like this quarter just went by oh my goodness, it went by so quick. Unbelievably quick.
What's your plan for classes in the summer?
Here, let me just stop the recording here real quick and I'll do that.